Hi, Eric.
Hi, Aaron.
How are you?
I'm doing well enough, I think. Thanks for asking.
Excellent. Um, Welcome to episode 2, I suppose.
I have a couple stories. When I was at Brigham Young University as an undergrad, my wife, whom I met there and married while we were both undergrads, she did some research on behalf of one of her professors, which involved going down to the University of Utah and going into their library and researching the Deseret alphabet to help him put together a scholarly article on the alphabet.
Yeah.
It sort of piqued my interest in phonetic alphabets. And one of the things I found myself doing, one thing I love doing, Aaron, is reading old things.
Yeah.
I just think old things are so interesting. And I love watching old films, and anything old um, seems in a way a little more honestly human because I can, it's hard for me to see past my own reality in this and the stuff that's happening on Twitter, right? Like the world is bubbling around me and it's hard to see past that. But when you look directly into the past, I feel like it's a little easier to see people. So I love doing that. And one thing I found myself doing was going down into the basement of the library at BYU to where the periodicals were, periodicals going back decades, in some cases, well over a century. And there was a general interest magazine that I took to reading, which I found very interesting. And it was published in a phonetic alphabet. If I
Uh-huh.
remember correctly, it was Pitman's alphabet,
Hmm.
which is one of the inspirations for the Deseret alphabet, though I could be wrong about that. And it didn't take long to learn Pitman's alphabet. And I was able to read and
No
enjoy
way.
stories from like 125, 30, however many years ago it was. And it was in a different alphabet. I mean, it was pretty close to English, but it was different enough that it just added this extra layer of like, this is cool
Yeah.
to every story. And occasionally there would be words that I couldn't figure out, and eventually I'd realize what they were. And it's like, whoa, we do not say it that way.
Uh-huh. No, that's interesting, right? Because you have a record of some pronunciations that are gone.
Right. That is kind of a cool thing. Because that's something we talk about this actually when I teach poetry.
Mhm.
There are like one of the most famous opening couplets in English literature is "Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove," which I'm going to guess when it was written, love and prove rhymed with each other because
Oh,
all the other couplets rhyme in the poem,
uh-huh.
but love and prove they don't rhyme anymore.
Which way do you think it was? Was it
I'm
Louvre or was it Prov?
I'm going to guess it was love and prove.
Oh, so neither.
That's my guess, but I actually don't know. I could have looked that up and sounded intelligent, but I actually am not
Well,
sure.
I'm going to try and sound intelligent by saying that's Shakespeare.
You would be wrong.
Oh, no.
However, however, if it makes you feel better, you can blame your education on that because perhaps you read a particular play of his which quotes this and has the
Uh-huh.
characters sing it, and you understandably thought that Shakespeare wrote it because it was in his play.
All right. What play was that?
Was it As You Like It? It was one of the comedies. I don't
Uh-huh.
remember.
And where was he quoting from?
So the poem is called "The Passionate Shepherd to His Love," and it was written by Christopher Marlowe,
Mhm.
of whom Shakespeare admired Marlowe very much. When Shakespeare's first plays are essentially ripping off Marlowe before he found his own voice.
Is he in part of any of the conspiracy theories?
Yeah, you bet he is. Because people love conspiracy theories. It's funny, like as long as being a playwright was a disreputable reputation, people were happy to have a guy from a less aristocratic background write the plays. But once becoming Shakespeare was the best thing you could be, all of a sudden he wasn't good enough to have written the plays.
That's great.
Nobody in his time thought that Shakespeare didn't write the plays. This is not an idea that came up for hundreds of years later. Like nobody at the time thought that he didn't write the plays. Obviously, he wrote the plays. What a dumb thing to suggest otherwise.
Okay, we should interrupt here. Dear listener, we don't have a course of action for today's episode.
Yes, I have notes, but I have no outline.
That's
But
right.
what are we talking about, Aaron?
I
What's the
wanted
subject?
I wanted to talk about the Deseret alphabet because I learned about it and I just thought it was cool, right?
So
And I
tell
wanted to
us what you.
return to some of our face and hat roots of just instead of talking about hot button issues or interesting I wanted to do interesting oddities.
Yeah, why the heck not? And
Yeah.
and the Deseret alphabet is nothing if not an interesting oddity. So as a neophyte to the Deseret alphabet cult, what are your initial impressions?
Okay, so if you have never heard of the Deseret alphabet, dear listener, what I would invite you to do is to go and click on the very first link in the show notes. I'm sorry. All right. It's going to be to the Wikipedia page. on the Deseret alphabet, which, as is the want for it, it is excellent and includes lots of pictures. And if you go and you look, you'll see a series of glyphs that were designed by a person named George D. Watt. And these glyphs are replacements for English phonemes, right?
Phonemes,
English phonemes, meaning just in other words, it's a pronunciatable language.
That's the idea. It was a terrible idea. I have a lot of opinions on this.
But Brigham Young was so excited.
Yeah, and I really, that's kind of what I really want to talk about today is I have repented of my opinion of Brigham Young and the Deseret alphabet in the course of thinking about this episode.
Uh-huh.
But I want to save that for later.
Okay, fantastic. Anyway, I actually like the glyphs. I think they're really cool. If you read later in the article, there's some critiques of them that it makes the language look kind of, monotone. That can't be right. Monochromatic.
Hard to read.
Hard to read. It looks Greek. It looks like it looks like writing in capital Greek letters. And so the mathematician in my brain sees it and panics and starts trying to do derivatives or something.
Well, there's a reason that we developed lowercase letters because as it ends up, Mr. Scientist, when we read, we're not reading letters, we're reading words. Our mind, through the course of reading thousands and thousands of pages, has learned the shape of words. And so most of the time, as we're reading, we're just recognizing words by their shape. But when everything's in capital letters, as in the Deseret alphabet, or on a Roman monument, every word is the same shape. They're all equally rectangular. And I mean, they might be different lengths, but essentially they're all just rectangles. But with lowercase letters, you get these ups and downs and things, and words take on unique shapes, and it's just so much easier to read.
In fact, the designer of this alphabet, again, George Watt, who I can't wait to talk about, he kind of wanted to redo it later, but never really got a chance to. But I was wondering if that was more because if you just wanted to have it easier to write. But maybe I get at you what you're saying. It'd be easier to read.
Yeah, I think reading is the main problem. And when you develop language as a baby, first you learn to understand the spoken language, and then you learn to speak. And it's the same way with reading and writing. First you learn how to read, then you learn how to write. And so Brigham Young, one of his reasons he wanted to do this was, and this is going to tie in later, but he was hoping that we could waste less time in school teaching spelling if everything was just spelled the way it sounded. Mm-hmm. We would save so much time learning how to read and write, and we could spend more time actually learning important stuff rather than spelling. Which is
that makes sense.
It makes sense, but
if you could flip a
Ben
switch.
Franklin thought the same thing, and he couldn't pull it off. What did he try to do? Well, he thought we needed a phonetic alphabet also, and he suggested, I don't have this open. I wasn't planning on talking about Ben Franklin, but I believe he threw out C. He threw out a couple letters that we didn't need, and sometimes he assigned those letters to new sounds with the idea that it would be easier.
But I think that if you want to know more, you should maybe consult one of the religious texts by Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if that's actually in one of those movies, but
if not, I hope it National
is.
Treasure 3. There's only been 2 so far, right?
I think there might have been a third one that everybody forgot, but at this point, it might
National
just be...
Treasure 7.
Yeah,
will all be in Ben Franklin's phonetic language. But
so
at the time, go ahead. I was just going to say, at the time of the Deseret alphabet, phonetic languages were all the rage. There were a lot of them being created and promoted with the idea that it would simplify things. And it's going to keep happening. Like George Bernard Shaw, 50 years later, is going to promote a phonetic alphabet because the English spelling is nutty and we should just fix it. Unfortunately, English spelling is nutty for really good reasons, and you can't just fix it.
Oh, okay. Now listen, that's fascinating. What do you mean?
Well, I'd be happy to give you some examples.
Please.
I'm going to spell a word, and you pronounce it the way you would pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, not all these examples will prove my point. Some of them will be contradictory, but all of them together, I think, prove my point. So the word is Knight.
That's night.
Right. Why is it spelled that way, Aaron?
Well, It certainly shouldn't be. It should be spelled Nite maybe, or
Something.
with a
So
lot
it's
fewer
spelled that
letters.
way because we used to pronounce it that way. If
So
you
we
go
used to
back
pronounce
far
it
enough,
Knigget.
yeah, Knick, something like that. I don't know exactly what the GH sound makes. It's a sound that we don't have in English anymore. Yeah, so it's spelled that way for historical reasons. And you don't really need it spelled that way anymore. And there are times where spelling reforms catch on. Webster, the fellow who made the dictionary in America, a lot of the differences between English, meaning British English, and American English spellings are because he changed them in his dictionary because we didn't need the extra U in color, for instance. And so he made a lot of those changes, and they did stick because they were simple and they didn't really change that much. I don't think he changed night, as far as I know.
The software that I work on, this comes up sometimes.
Oh,
Okay?
yeah?
Yeah, because we have words, because it's developed as a collaboration between ourselves and some folks over in the UK.
Yeah.
And so we have the word parameterize,
Mm.
and with a Z or an S, depending on where you are,
depending
right?
where you
and
are,
it's
yeah.
and it's inconsistent. And because it's code, right? You have to
that's a
write it.
problem.
You have to write it correctly. Right?
Yeah.
And I actually right now couldn't tell you which way it's written. Like I
That's
can't even remember.
That's what running for bugs is for.
Mhm.
I'm going to spell another word for you.
Okay.
Atone.
Atone.
Right. We say atone. It is a compound word.
At one.
And one. And that was how it was originally pronounced. It was pronounced like the word at and like the word one. That changed over time. And if we change the spelling because of the pronunciation, that history of the word would be lost. It would not be apparent that atone means at one. And words are changing all the time, like ration or ration, like which one's right? Like the word is undergoing a shift right now.
Ration or ration. Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, State of the Union. This is the one where Chicago is. How do you say that state, Aaron?
The one where Chicago is?
Yeah. Oh no, am I about to embarrass you? I apologize.
Okay. Chicago.
Capital is Springfield.
Chicago, Illinois.
Yes,
Illinois.
That's how I say it too. What if you said that Illinois and then you wanted to complete the sentence is where Chicago is? How would you say that?
Illinois is where Chicago is.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I thought you would say that. I don't say that.
What do you say?
I say when Illinois is followed by a vowel, most of the time I say Illinois is where Chicago is.
You put the S in.
I do, only when it's followed by a vowel though. And I don't know I don't know how common that is, but it's something I do more than 50% of the time.
Okay, that's excellent.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay.
So Shakespeare, you've heard of him.
I have.
We were just talking about him. We have 6 different ways that he spelled his own name. Now,
okay.
Some of these are because he was abbreviating
because he's not real. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes it's because he was abbreviating his name, but even when he spells all the letters, he doesn't spell it consistently. Now, part of that is that spelling wasn't consistent then, but because spelling wasn't consistent, that means people were spelling things phonetically. So all of those things seemed appropriate. Now, of course, something like Pitman's alphabet or Benjamin Franklin's alphabet or the Deseret alphabet is designed to make these things always be the same. But it's also entirely possible that Shakespeare didn't say his name exactly the same way every time. And it's certainly true that other people didn't. I don't know if that's an argument for or against a phonetic alphabet. Here's another one. Speaking of British, it's not just spellings that are different, right? Is it schedule or schedule? And should we spell it differently because we say the word differently?
That's interesting. So that would lead, I think I see what you're saying. That would lead to an actual printed difference in the words.
Right. In which it would be more difficult. And that does happen so far already. Like jail is spelled very differently in the 2 languages, even though I think it's pronounced the same. But what about the words that are spelled different or pronounced differently? Are we therefore going to embrace different pronunciations? When I was in Korea as a missionary, I was on the bus one night. We were headed home. It had been a long day. It was dark outside, and we passed by, and I think it was a karaoke bar, if I remember correctly. And the name of the place was in neon, and I read it, and it was in the Korean alphabet, but it was clearly not a Korean word. It was clearly a borrowed English word, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I was like, utopia, utopia, utopia. And I finally had to look it up in my dictionary. It's like, oh, it's utopia.
Oh.
It had been translated into a different alphabet phonetically, and I could not figure out what it was. Similarly, like algebra used to be pronounced algebra. It was algebra now. Oh, I can't say it. Algebra. I can't even say it wrong. But it used to be pronounced a different way. And this gets to an interesting thing about English. Like English, spelling isn't just about the sounds. It's a little more complicated than that. So, for instance, I'm going to say a noun, and I would like you to say the exact same sequence of letters as a verb. I'll give you the first one as an example, all right? So if I say record, that's a noun, you could say record, which is a verb. And they're the same word. They're spelled the same. They have very tightly similar meanings because they have this, they're the same word essentially, but they're used differently and we pronounce it differently. So how about conduct?
Conduct.
Attribute.
Attribute.
Object.
Object. I object.
And the last one is combat.
Oh, combat.
Yeah, and there are lots of these in English.
So it's just the stress.
Yes, but because the stress changes, oftentimes, not in every single example I shared, but oftentimes in English, when you change the stress, you change the vowel. So, for instance, in record and record, record versus record, all four vowels are different in those two words. Changes to E, and then the more common example is like the O changes to the schwa sound, the sort of the no, the vague meaningless vowel schwa. So are you supposed to, now maybe that's an argument for a phonetic alphabet, that they'll be spelled differently when they're pronounced differently, but I think it just leads to,
what leads to more words in that case.
Yeah, it leads to more words. Is it actually better? Like, I don't know. The advantage to a spelling system that has grown up evolutionarily is that even though it will have little weird things, like we have little weird animals on planet Earth, generally it holds together and it makes sense. And there's reasons for it that we feel deep in our native speaker souls. It makes it hard for non-native speakers, for sure. But a lot of the reasons things are spelled a certain way still are actually salient and do exist deep in our reptile English-speaking brain. That metaphor was bad, but the point is, like, it's not totally random, and that's part of the reason why none of these caught on, because you can change, you can drop the UE on catalog and nobody's confused, but when you start really changing things, all of a sudden night and night and night are all spelled the same, but they're not the same word. And is that actually better for reading? It's debatable.
It is debatable and interesting, because you're right. You would have to get it from context in that case. Yeah.
And sometimes context is not clear. Sometimes you can't tell. It could be either. And that drives me crazy when that happens in modern English. It would be way worse if we had a phonetic alphabet. And let's not forget that people have different accents. So are they all going to be spelling words a different way?
Well, this is one of the things that I found as I was reading the article, because reading this article on the Deseret alphabet immersed me in I don't want to say culture, but because that's not the right word, a field, right? A discipline of English.
Discipline, yeah.
That I just was not familiar with, right? So I'm reading through it, and it talks about wine.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so it's talking about in the Deseret edition of the Book of Mormon, which, let's just pause for a second. The Deseret alphabet edition of the Book of Mormon is a thing that exists, and only 250 copies of it were printed. Right?
Wait, no, that can't possibly be right, because my grandmother had one. That would be absurd if there was one out of 250.
Well, let me go ahead and find the reference again and mention it.
No, I'm trying to think this through. My guess is there must have been another printing like later for hobbyists, like in the 1940s or something. I don't know, but
Okay, well, I'm off by a bit here. So
okay.
the alphabet was first of all, this is a great quote. According to Beesley, many have written that interest in the alphabet died with Brigham Young. This, however, is not true. The alphabet was already regarded as a failure during Young's time. I don't know who wrote that, what Wikipedia article wrote that on, but that's a solid burn. But yeah, only 500 copies of,
Wow.
of the full Book of Mormon translated into the Deseret alphabet sold for $2 each.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so if you have one, then that's pretty good.
My cousin Alan has it now, I believe. He, as a kid, taught himself. My grandmother had actually, maybe, are we talking about the full Book of Mormon? Because I don't think hers was the full Book of Mormon. It was just an excerpt.
This says the full Book of Mormon.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so this was one of the smaller ones. It was just like, I don't know, First Nephi through Enos or something.
There was one
and also
called,
the
that was for First Nephi through Omni. That was a
okay. I think that's
version.
the one she had, and she also had one that was like sort of like a first grade primer. And he taught himself to read the Deseret alphabet, and I was always kind of jealous. But that's why I didn't like and it came time to distribute the books, I felt that he had earned them. So
anyway, the thing I was saying about wine and wine is I was reading this article and I found myself learning about things called mergers, which I had no idea existed. So it was just interesting to learn about this discipline, right? So wine and wine. So the difference between wine and wine.
which apparently they say in other parts of the country, but
yeah,
I have a hard time saying that at all,
mm-hmm.
let alone just having it come out naturally.
Yeah, I clicked on the link and it was parodied in Family Guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like when somebody makes fun of somebody else.
It was also parodied in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. There
you go.
As Captain Holt says whoop as whoop. And Jake Peralta is trying to get him to say it correctly, but he can't. He has to say whoop.
Yep. So the word wherefore was written in one way with H, which means they did not exhibit the wine merger. Anyway, I just thought this was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a political problem at this point, right? So speaking of the Korean alphabet, which is an excellent alphabet, if we were a different podcast, we could do an episode on it.
Well, I know that it was designed as well. It was replaced.
It was designed very intentionally. Yeah.
It's a replacement for some other alphabet.
Well, I think as a replacement for Chinese characters, which are not phonetic at all.
And it's not that old, right?
Well, it's a few hundred years old. Okay. Yeah, but eventually what they've decided is that the Seoul dialect is the standard pronunciation. And sort of like how the French do, they have an official body which decides what words are official Korean words. And that's how they solve the problem. But it does, like, politically speaking, you're essentially saying Seoul Korean is better than your Korean, other parts of the country. And I guess in Korea that's worked fine. But can you imagine in the United States? And there are other English speaking countries.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, people are proud of their accents here in the US.
Yeah. So it's doomed to failure, I think.
Interesting. Okay. So I think that go ahead. You made the point earlier on where you said that you couldn't ever, that we have different spellings in English on purpose, right? And so the summary of that point is because it gives you more words.
Well, because it's functional is what I would say. It has function. And yeah, it is a hassle. And I don't know anybody who hasn't had a hard time spelling at least 100 words in English, right? English is a difficult language graphically for all these reasons. But the reasons they persist is because these weird things about English spelling are functional. They serve a purpose. And there are a number of different purposes they serve. But that's why you can't just say, like, this is dumb, let's get rid of it and replace it with a phonetic alphabet, because a phonetic alphabet creates a whole new set of problems that we would then have to accept. And why would we change the problems we're used to for new problems?
Okay, well, that's exactly what Brigham Young tried. So it was in the Utah settlement, right? And it's really about the utopianism and the reform, Upotanianism, and the kind of like idealism, right, of the Utah Valley in the 1850s, right? And this was one of the ideas. So Brigham Young heard a talk by somebody about this kind of phonetic alphabet and then commissioned George D. Watt to actually make it. And then if you go and you read George D. Watt's Wikipedia page, it's a roller coaster of emotion.
Let's take that tangent real quick. Why don't you tell us about George D. Watt, then we'll get back to Brigham Young and the alphabet and University of Deseret and whatever else we want to talk about.
I'm just going to hit the highlights. Look, we've talked about before about okay, I'll just show a couple of the highlights because it was a real roller coaster reading this. 1812 is when he was born. He was the first. This is what's great. He was the first Latter-day Saint convert from the British Isles.
Whoa!
Right.
Good for him.
Yep. He was baptized a saint by Heber C. Kimball, and he won the right to be the first official British convert by winning a foot race against 8 others. So that's the first part that I really appreciated.
I totally forgot about this story. I skipped the beginning of the article. I just read like the last half of it, and I've heard that story. That's about him. Oh man.
Yeah, isn't that great? He raced a bunch of other people so he could be the first Mormon from the British Isles. I love it. All right. So anyway, so he went and got baptized, and then with some other people came to the U.S., was sent back to England as a missionary, right? And that's where he learned Pitman shorthand, right? Which is, wait, you said that's the one that you learned?
No. So Pitman shorthand and Pitman's phonetic alphabet are 2 different inventions.
Ah, okay. And I know we kind of breezed by the fact that you learned this. I'm going to come back to this topic later. Okay.
It really wasn't that hard.
Okay. Well, so, Pitman shorthand. So this was a way of writing quickly as a clerk, right? And then he's a reporter for the Deseret News and a private clerk from Brigham Young. And he published the Journal of Discourses, sermons, right? And that's like where we get most of Brigham Young's writings. Is that true or false?
I don't know about most, but certainly a significant percentage.
Yeah, 26-volume collection of public sermons. Remained the primary editor until 1968. So he was appointed to a committee to do the phonetic alphabet, right?
Yes.
The Deseret alphabet. He was a strong promoter of the alphabet and worked on it. Then he was disfellowshipped, and he joined the Godbeite church.
Yeah, the Godbeites.
Which now this rabbit holed me big time, Eric.
Oh yeah, I've gone on some trips through alternate Mormonisms before.
Okay. Yes, this is an alternate Mormonism. They were originally called the Church of Zion, or their defunct William Godby, right? And they embraced all belief systems like spiritualism and mysticism, right? And so he was a firm believer in it and was so his whole life until he tried to come back to the church, and they never let him back in. But I think President John Taylor made sure he was buried in his temple robes.
But wait, but you skipped the part where, this is my favorite part of the article, where he goes to John Taylor and says, if I don't die in full fellowship with the church, that's on you, man. That's on you. And so John Taylor, when he died, came and made sure he was buried in his temple robes. It's like deathbed repentance, only it wasn't the guy who died who was repenting.
Okay, so you know how a roller coaster has a kind of an awesome like twist at the end just to make you remember?
Yes.
Okay. Like many early Latter-day Saints, Watt practiced plural marriage. He had 6 wives, and one of his wives, Jane Brown, was his half sister. They shared a mother, Mary Ann Wood.
Yeah. How about that?
Oh man. Everywhere from a foot race to plural marriage, married to a half sister, to designing the Deseret alphabet. This article on George D. Watt has it all.
And it's
Props
short.
to whoever wrote it.
You could print it on a single piece of paper.
Yep. Anyway, it didn't work. Nobody wanted to do it.
Didn't work.
They tried to teach it in schools. They even printed some coins with it. Here's a picture of a $5 gold piece with the inscription "Holiness to the Lord" in the Deseret alphabet on it. I like the look of it, and one of the reasons I like it so much is it's so weird.
No, it's awesome. I totally love it. When we did Monsters and Mormons with Peculiar Pages, which is a great book and everyone should buy a copy, we put a little Easter egg on the cover in the Deseret alphabet. So look for that.
Okay, excellent. I think I actually still have your copy on the shelf, and I keep forgetting to look
Oh,
at it.
did I lend it to
I
you?
will. I will look for it. I will
Uh-huh.
look for that Easter egg. It's
Yeah.
on my intention to read it. Yeah,
One
go
of the
ahead.
problems, though, that we haven't talked about is that it was prohibitively expensive because they had to make all their own type. With other type, you can get mass-produced type from foundries in other parts of the country and the world. If you want to print stuff in the Deseret alphabet, you have to you have to create your own type. That is
Yeah.
an expensive, difficult, time-consuming, labor-intensive, or intensive process. It's expensive.
You know where the word cliche comes from?
Cliche? No, I don't.
It comes from the sounds the type machines would make. Cliche, cliche.
Really?
That's what I
fun.
heard.
Is that true? I hope that's true. I'm not going to look it up
It's
until
it's a
after the show's
QI,
over.
or maybe
Someone-
never.
Oh, it was on QI?
Yeah.
Well, we'll trust them.
Yeah,
They're on
pretty good.
television.
You know, we're a fairly public domain podcast. Why not just play the clip?
Thong maker.
Yes.
I have a theory that this might be a gentleman who makes foundation garments for ladies, and it's those very thin things which are a cross between a thong and dental floss.
Oh, I know just what you mean.
Yes.
An arse floss.
Yes,
piece of-
exactly.
Yes, horrible. Yes. The person cleaning it is the one you feel sorry for. No, flon actually is a corruption of the French word flan, as in flan. It means a heavy base.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And it's actually from the word printing. What the flong made was actually, it was because it was solid. The Greek for solid is stereo, and it was known as stereotyping. Because you were making the same thing each time. You made a stereotype. And oddly enough, the noise the ink made was rendered as cliche. The noise that made when you rolled the ink. So both stereotype and cliche, which sort of mean the same thing, are both printers' terms.
So literally a cliche is made by stereotype.
Yes, exactly. It is very amusing.
Yeah.
And we're only here to be quite interesting. We don't expect you to be rolling on the floor, barking like a seal, vomiting with laughter at that thought. But I do hope you will take it home, wrap it in a little parcel of lavender paper, and store it in the bottom heart of your drawer.
I'm
worried I'll
planning
get it
to-
wrong.
Yeah,
I'm,
okay.
I'm planning to slightly misremember it.
They had a great a moment in their show about 10 years into their show where they plotted as a function of time the degradation of facts, right?
Ooh.
And so facts have a half-life according to this one study, and so they plotted it
Oh,
over
my.
all of their seasons, and it falls off, of course. And so you go back 10 years and you could say with reasonable confidence that like 60% of the stuff they said was false, right?
Wow.
So we're about 4 years into our show. So that puts us, I don't know, like in the 80 to 90% accurate
That's
for our
so
first seasons.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, because the show is point-based, they retroactively awarded a huge number of points to the one guy who's been on all the episodes.
Wow. I haven't seen that show in ages, but it's great. I
love
recommend it to people.
I love QI. Yeah, it's a family favorite. So okay, what else we got? So so it didn't work. It's gorgeous. It's very weird. It's actually, I tried to, so me and the missus sat for a few minutes trying to sound out one of the words in it, and we came up with the word with that. It said faith, right? And we were pretty proud of ourselves, but it was a bit annoying to do it. And I wouldn't want to do it more than that. But you actually did this with the Pitman.
Yeah, but
language.
go
What
up
was
to
that?
the info box at the beginning of the Deseret alphabet article, and there's a link to Pitman's alphabet,
Yeah.
the English phonotypic alphabet, and click on its. You can see that it is much closer to actual English.
Oh, okay.
I believe this is the one that I learned, but I might be wrong. It might have been a different one. It's been a long time.
Okay, this isn't the one I remember with lots of little curly cues. That would probably
Yeah.
be the
Yeah, I think it was this one, but I might be wrong.
stenographic
It
language.
might have been a variation.
Well, it's
Um,
still pretty cool.
It's still pretty cool, and it's a lot easier than the Deseret alphabet. But this gets to why I used to like hold a grudge against Brigham Young. Should we move into that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as you pointed out, that was hard for you and the missus, but a baby, right, who grows up learning this alphabet should have no trouble.
And they
In
taught
fact-
it in schools, right?
They tried. Yeah, it was. I don't know that I go so far as to say that they taught it in schools. They attempted to. But what happened was it was hard, right? And it's not like your parents could help you because they didn't know it either. One of the thoughts was that this would be good for immigrants because everyone could learn this phonetic alphabet and be super easy. But I don't know if you've ever met an immigrant, but sometimes they have accents, and so the whole phonetic thing doesn't necessarily work.
Of course
Having
not.
standardized spelling rather than phonetic spelling is helpful. Now, they were working towards standardizing the phonetic spelling, but those things are kind of contradictory. But anyway, the point is, one of the ideas Brigham Young had was that if everybody learns this in a generation or two, nobody will be able to read anything that's not in the Deseret alphabet. And thus we can control them and what they see. And so this is something that this is my grudge against Brigham Young, because I don't like that. I don't like the sound of that at all. But I am repenting of this because of an essay I read in the past week by Eugene England. And if I could delay for just a moment, I'd just like to say that our sister podcast in the Dialogue Podcast Network, the Dialogue Book Report, they just had an interview with Kristine Haglund, who wrote a new book about Eugene England.
Who is the okay? Tell me.
Let me talk about Eugene England. I'm also reading a biography of Eugene England by Terrell Givens right now. Eugene England is a fascinating character in late 20th century Mormon history. He's a theologian. He's a thinker. He's just a really good person, and he got in all sorts of trouble trying to do the right thing. This actually, maybe it's a different episode, but Eugene England is an interesting guy. He's one of the founders of the Association for Mormon Letters. He's one of the founders of of Dialogue itself, and just a fascinating guy. And he had a really generous spirit, and I love reading his essays because I think, haven't we talked about his essay, Why the Church is as True as the Gospel, before? Does that ring a bell? I think we have. Anyway, this essay is called On Bringing Peace to BYU with the Help of Brigham Young. So I'd just like to share a couple things that I learned about Brigham Young from this essay that makes me feel that I had been quite unfair to him. Let me start by pointing out that one thing Brigham Young felt strongly was that all knowledge belongs to our faith. This is also a core tenet of Face and Hat. Doesn't matter if it's science, doesn't matter if it's history. If it's true, it's part of our understanding of our faith as Latter-day Saints. And Brigham Young felt this way very strongly. One thing he said, which I think is great, we are only just approaching the shores of a vast ocean of information that pertains to the physical world, to say nothing of that which pertains to the heavens, to angels and celestial beings. To him, like whether it's about angels or whether it's about space or whether it's about crystallography, it's all part of Mormonism. And I like that. But let me share a couple things that he said. This is probably the key line I want to read by Brigham Young. And then I want to read a little synopsis of Brigham Young's thinking by Hugh Nibley. I have a lot of things underlined in this essay, and maybe others will come up as we talk about it. But to introduce it, I want to share these two quotations. So this first is from Brigham Young. Wait, before we go into the quotation, Aaron, the Greek myth of the bed of Procrustes, does that ring a bell?
It does not.
So the bed of Procrustes is this bed. And if I remember the story correctly, Procrustes would have guests to his bed. And if they were too tall, he would cut off part of their body so they fit the bed. And if they were too short, he would stretch them so they would fit the bed. Not the best kind of bed. My recommendation is change the bed, not your body. But that's a metaphor that Brigham Young's going to draw on here. Brigham Young says, the world is before us. Eternity is before us, and an inexhaustible fountain of intelligence for us to obtain. Every man, and more particularly my immediate associates who are with me daily, know how I regret the ignorance of this people, how it floods my heart with sorrow to see so many elders of Israel who wish everybody to come to their standard and be measured by their measure. Every man must be just so long to fit their iron bedstead or be cut off to the right length. If too short, he must be stretched to fill the requirement. Brigham Young says here that it's the job of the elders of Zion to stretch. It's not our job to make everybody stretch to what we think Mormonism is. Like, yeah, that's not how it works. There are lots of different standards and lots of different ways to be. Now the quotation from Hugh Nibley. Hugh Nibley read Brigham Young more widely and deeply than you or I, or probably anybody who listens to us, I'm going to guess. And Hugh Nibley said, no man ever spoke his mind more frankly on all subjects. All Brigham Young's days, he strove to communicate his inmost feelings, unburdening himself without the aid of notes or preparation in a vigorous and forthright prose that was the purest anti-rhetoric. It has been common practice to dismiss any saying of his which one disapproves, and he makes no effort to please, by observing that he said so many things that he was bound to contradict himself, and therefore need not be taken too seriously all the time. I admit this has been my opinion at times, Aaron. No view could be more ill-advised, Hugh Nibley goes on, for there never was a man more undeviatingly consistent and rational in thought and utterance. Granted that Brigham would admonish the saints to wear overcoats one day, so to speak, and the next day turn around and advise shirt sleeves. The element of scandal and confusion vanishes if we only get the main idea, which is that it is not the rule book or the administration, but the weather that prescribes the proper dress for the day. All the other apparent contradictions in Brigham Young's teachings likewise vanish when we grasp the main idea behind them. So I have repented in assuming that Brigham Young, that the right way to see him through the lens of the Deseret alphabet is someone who is only concerned with some sort of dystopian utopia where all information is controlled by the central power and you have no literacy in other languages, that only the Deseret alphabet is, it's a way to control people. And I suspect it's more complicated than that. For a man who said that all knowledge belongs to the saints, the idea that he would just want to cut everybody off is inconsistent, and I probably don't fully understand his point of view on this topic. That's where I stand today.
That makes sense. It's nuanced. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that we are looking backwards through history, right?
Yeah.
There is a section on other motives in the Wikipedia article that describes what you are talking about, right?
Oh, I don't think I read that part.
Yeah, and one of the first so originally the alphabet was created to simplify the spelling of English words for the benefit of children and English as a second language learners, right? As you were saying, there were lots of immigrants in Utah from various mostly European countries.
Pretty much European.
Yeah, but they didn't all speak English, right?
Right. They spoke things like Swedish.
Okay, so the first theory, the other motive as to why, so the first nefarious motive for the Deseret alphabet, which has been largely dismissed as it says here, was to make secrets, right? To make a code that only Mormons would know about, right? Mm. And so there's a reprint in a New York newspaper, right? And it says the new Deseret alphabet is completed and a fount of pica type has been cast in St. Louis. Specimens of the type are published in the St. Louis papers, but they are unproducible in types that common people use, right? The Ucases, right? I
had to look that word up just now.
What is it?
Oh, it is an edict. I believe the word comes from Russian. It's what a czar. It's like a czar's edict.
Okay, that makes sense. The Ucases, or the edicts of Brother Brigham, will hereafter be a sealed letter, literally to Gentile eyes. Right. Anyway, this is nonsense. They published a key to the dictionary in every article.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that maybe in 100 years that was the idea, but
well, that was what the next point was, right?
Yeah.
Is that they were this is from The Advantage. This is an article from the Deseret News, right, in 1868, right? Mm-hmm. If our community were situated as others are, it might be quick stoic to attempt the introduction of this reform among us with the hope of carrying it into practical operation. But our position is unique. We are united. Some have an idea that if a child be educated in the system of spelling and writing by sound, it will be a detriment to it in learning the present system. If they could find no better reading than much of the miserable trash that now obtains extensive circulation, it would be better if they never learned to read the present orthography, in other words, the present writing system, right?
Yeah.
And here it's referring to things like penny dreadfuls, pulp magazines, and such.
Yeah, Brigham Young was very pro-literature, but he was very anti-novel.
Right. And continuing the quote, in such a case, ignorance would be blissful. The greatest evils which now flourish and under which Christendom groans are directly traceable to the licentiousness of the press.
Licentiousness is a fun word.
It's a great word, right? And yeah, but I could see where thinking like this would be, would make you go, well, I mean, this would lead to the control of the language, but I think I agree with you. I think that it's just much simpler to think that Brigham Young heard a talk about how phonetic languages are awesome, how they get rid, and wanted to make one.
I mean, they are
People-
cool.
People
still do
generally
this.
people generally aren't nefarious.
No.
I could just state that.
Yeah, most people's motivations are good.
They are gorgeous. And by the way, the phenomes, that can't be the right word.
Close enough.
The glyphs are in Unicode. And
They
that
are.
means that they're forever. I wanted to talk about this a little bit, okay? If you don't know what Unicode is, everybody has heard the word Unicode, but it's I just want to talk about it a little bit because I wanted to get a bit of computer science into the episode. So the original way of encoding letters into computers, Eric, is using what character set?
I'm going to guess ASCII.
That's right. So ASCII has 256 characters because it's 8 bits to the power of 8, starting with the character 40 and working your way up through the letters. You have each number assigned to a letter, right? And those are the standard uppercase and lowercase English letters. Of course, it doesn't work with anything else, right? When you start having like Arabic or Greek or math or anything. And so instead, what they came up with was Unicode. And Unicode has space for a lot of characters. Okay. The standard, which is maintained by the Unicode Consortium, defines 144,762 characters, covering 159 modern and historic scripts, as well as including the Deseret alphabet. And so
I'm still impressed by that. Like, it is like an obscure historical footnote, and yet it's
Unicode. Forever. If the human race persists for 10,000 years from now, right? And Unicode is still kicking around in the computers, the Deseret alphabet will persist. It's there. You can't get rid of it. Those characters, those 40 characters, have numbers assigned to them permanently. And the Deseret alphabet is available. And you can get a font and you can just type with it.
I've done it myself.
I think that's really cool. I think it's cool that a bit of Mormon history, right, persisted into the international standard for writing.
Yeah.
Even though it's not used by anybody, it's still here.
It's only used by mostly Mormon weirdos, but those are my people. So you can read Pride and Prejudice in the Deseret alphabet now. Like, who doesn't? Why not?
Who doesn't want to do that?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. but I appreciate wanting to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's still easier than doing it in Klingon.
If you yeah, that's true. If you're going to do your own language, what would you do it in? If you were going to make a language, would you be phonetic or would you not be?
Well, I think it makes sense to start phonetic.
Yeah.
But I think it's also makes sense to respect the evolution of sound and speaking and the way people use the language.
Yeah.
And so language will adjust as time goes on. I mean, here's a weird example of how things happen. You're familiar with an apron that you might wear when you're baking a cake?
Yes.
So originally the word for that was napron.
Mm-hmm.
And so a napron over the years slowly changed into an apron. It's just kind of crazy, right? Like, it's fun that cool. Like butterflies are called butterflies because they used to be called flutterbys, and the letters just moved around. It's awesome how language adapts and changes, and spelling is one of those things that adapts and changes, but largely it is the way it is because it is more functional than not most of the time. Although I'm sure we could find exceptions, but generally speaking, evolution, it's survival of the fittest, and I think it's the same for language.
Flutterbye sounds like a Pokemon.
It probably is.
Have you do you know anything about Esperanto?
I know a little bit about Esperanto. I just found out a friend of mine runs the local Esperanto club in Utah Valley.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
She used to live in El Sobrante, just up the road from us. That's where she grew up.
Well, I think it's cool, as we were talking about a constructed language. That's what this is. Yeah. Esperanto is a constructed language. It's actually
fully constructed. It's
spoken by like 100,000 people, and they're native speakers of it, people who grew up speaking of it. But one thing that I like about it is that it's not I don't remember if it's phonetic or not, but it has modules, like small words
Mhm.
that can be built into big words, and so you can kind of you can have fewer total words but describe more things. Maybe kind
Yeah.
of like how German has a lot of compound words. So I thought that was cool. The reason I know about it is from the book series The Stainless Steel Rat.
Oh yeah, I know. I've read the first of those.
Yeah. So Slippery Jim DeGriz, the criminal mastermind, speaks Esperanto, and like
I didn't know that.
everybody does in that universe, just because I think the
It caught
author
on.
Harry Harrison was convinced that this is just going to be the
That it
future.
would work. I mean, it's a pretty decent attempt. My understanding is it's largely used now, not necessarily as a communicating language, but as a tool to, I don't know, learn other languages or something. I'm not exactly
Well,
sure.
as it's used to, well, the idea was it'd be a good second language, right? Because it's easy to
Yeah.
learn. If you have, it's like an average, romantic language, as it were.
And another sort of related phenomenon is lost languages that have been recreated. So, for instance, Hebrew was lost, and now it's the national language and the native language to many people who live in Israel.
What does it mean it was lost?
Nobody spoke it. Nobody natively spoke Hebrew.
Hmm.
And when they decided to create the nation of Israel, they recreated it, and now it's a functioning modern language.
Where did they recreate it from?
Well, there's a lot of historical texts of Hebrew, and so
Do they know
that
they got the
wasn't too difficult.
pronunciation right?
Well, you never know for sure, right? I mean, it's hard
Yeah.
even for us in a language that never died out to be sure we got the pronunciation right, so to speak.
As it were.
And the same thing happens, like the Native Americans from the Channel Islands recreated their language from a single woman who was recorded in the 1800s, and they've recreated the language best they can. It's kind of cool how things can persist.
All right, I love it. All right, there you go. There's our random ramblings for today. We hope you enjoyed learning about the Deseret alphabet. Face and Hat is brought to you by the Dialogue Podcast Network. We're members of it. We're excited about it. You can find me at Aaron Brewster on Twitter, and Eric
At THMAZING.
You can follow the podcast itself at Face and Hat, or go to faceandhat.com for the show notes. You can also find our Discord server if you want to in the show notes and join. We'll probably be putting spoilers in there as we plan future episodes. So if you want to help us do some research sometimes, maybe that would be a place to do it. Maybe
Yeah.
Twitter. Maybe Twitter's better for that. And we'd like to thank we'd like to thank Daniel Foster Smith for our music.
Yeah.
Bye.